Something's been coming up for me a lot lately during this time, which is the warrior archetype. So, and I like talking about this today because Sylvia did this great, um, mother energy, and Rose, your power. So I kind of want to. I got a lot of things I'm pulling together, and I hope you appreciate it. So let's settle in, close our eyes, just feel each other together. Thank you for being here. This has been an important part of my day, and all of you guys have kind of been blowing me away. So I really appreciate all of you. So I want to summon our warrior spirit, the warrior archetype. This is ancient wisdom. It appears in many cultures, in many religious traditions. There's the Japanese samurai, the warrior kings of Tibet, the knights of medieval Europe, warriors of the Native American tribes. It's a universal tradition of wisdom. There was a Tibetan Buddhist meditation master whose name I hope I pronounce correctly, Chogyam Trungpa, who wrote a book called The Sacred Path of the Warrior. And he writes that the sacred warrior conquers the world not through violence or aggression, but through gentleness and courage and self-knowledge. The warrior discovers the basic goodness of human life and radiates that goodness out into the world for the peace and sanity of others. So let's summon our warrior spirit. What does your inner warrior look like? How does your warrior appear to you right now? This image that comes to you of your warrior nature, let's embody it fully right now. I want to bring in some thoughts from other people. Yesterday, Amy gave us the image of standing firm on the ground and sinking our feet deep into the earth. Do that now in your mind's eye. Root yourself deeply. Feel yourself grounded, planted, and secure in the earth. Then, with your mind's eye, in your mind's eye, reach up to the sky with both your arms, both your hands, and pull the energy from the sky into you. Realize that by doing so, as Amy said, you've become a bridge between spirit and earth. I personally have been long fascinated by Native American ideas. I often feel pulled and guided by their wisdom, and I want to share some of that with you today. In my own shamanic studies, we have this image of becoming and embodying what we call a tiny hollow bone. It's an idea that comes from a Lakota holy man named Frank Fool's Crow. When you become a tiny hollow bone, you're the conduit for the source of all creation. You're the conduit not just between the earth and the sky, but also between the past and the future. So I want you to see yourself as both a warrior and a tiny hollow bone. The warrior stands firm in the ground, connected to the sky, and opens. In the Lakota tradition, there are 4 stages we go through to become this conduit, this open channel, this hollow bone. First, we have to rid ourselves of whatever blocks us. Things like doubt or reluctance or fear. Whatever slows or stops the flow of spirit through us, see it melting away. Allow the last 4 years of this swirl of emotion, fear and despair and anger and sadness and rage and embarrassment and everything else. See it fall away, draining out of you. See yourself opening more and more until you are clean and empty. The more empty you become, the more energy you can channel through you. And now, in this emptiness, fill yourself up with hope, with possibility, with love, with the spirit of unity, and with power. In fact, feel power right now surging through you, taking up space in you, taking up residence. As Rose had given us on Saturday, the image of holding our hands out like we're holding a globe, and within our hands and within our being, every part of our being, we feel our power and we hold our power. The last stage of the tiny hollow bone is that we give our power away. So I want you to imagine someone whom you wish to empower. Amy yesterday standing in line to vote, surrounded by Trump supporters. Maybe they need our power. Chandra, her neighbor with the Trump flag. I was moved by the idea that she said that these were people whom she relied on and they relied on her. And now she's conflicted. So maybe they need our power. Ani yesterday asked for our prayers. She's been falling and feeling afraid. So let's send her our power right now and remind her of her own power, her own sense of balance, her sure-footedness, her strength. As we give power away, we realize that we keep being filled back up. So who else needs our power? Imagine yourself giving it to them. Imagine our channels of energy hovering over battleground states as we flood the entire state with our power. The power to vote, the power to be heard, the power to love, the power to hope. So let's hover over Florida and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Arizona and Texas and Georgia. Let's give our power to the vote counters. Let's call to mind and invite into our hearts and into our circle again, right now, 53 Republican senators who are voting on the Supreme Court. Let's summon their integrity, their love, their commitment to come forth. And at least 4 of them, may at least 4 of them have the courage to vote no. May they have the courage to do the right thing, the honorable thing. I want to share with you some ancient wisdom from the Native Americans, along with some American history mixed in with some new information, things that have long fascinated me. So as Native Americans do, let's now imagine ourselves sitting around a fire. Astrologically, I'm a fire sign. I have a lot of fire in me. I've been moved by fire my whole life. As I say that, I bow to Jeanette, who's being touched by fire, by the threat of fire. And I just want to acknowledge that. So we're gathered around our fire. 20 years ago, in the fall of 2000, I was living in New York City. The New York Mets and the New York Yankees were in the World Series. Hillary Clinton was about to be elected to the Senate by the state of New York. And the presidential election featured George W. Bush and Al Gore. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it was the year the Supreme Court halted the vote count and awarded the presidency to Bush. I was working on a project for the FDNY, the Fire Department of New York City, working closely with many of the firefighters in the upper echelon of the FDNY, many of whom the following year would be killed on September 11th. All of these things devastated me, and so I wrote a book that was all about fire because I wanted to understand it. Fire as energy, as destructive force, as transformation, as passion, as violence, as God. I wrote a lot about the origins of New York City and the origins of democracy, and I pulled a few excerpts from this book to share with you because I think they're relevant and important reminders as we are mindful that we are the conduit between spirit and earth and past and future. So we sit around our fire, and these are the things I'd like to share with you. In the election of 2000, a lot of attention was being paid to the female vote. In fact, it seemed likely that women had the upper hand in the election, which was ironic since it had taken 150 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence for women to even be allowed to have a political voice. I would come to learn that that hadn't always been the case. The League of Iroquois Nations, who are thought to have occupied the area around modern-day New York since the 11th century, had given a sacred role to women. The natives believed that it was through the participation of women that love and compassion found their voice. It was the responsibility of women to hold a space for peace. Among the primitive people, if there was something more respected than sovereignty and unity, it was that the natural rights of all people, all of them, were honored, and the resources were shared equitably among them. In the hierarchy of their nations, there was more than merely a place made at the table for women. There was a context for them to be listened to and heard. When a council chief died or was removed from power, his title reverted to the women of his clan, and their job was to determine the next chief. So if we were to translate that idea into our current system, it would look something like this. Only the men could be elected to lead the people, but only the women could vote. Imagine that. As I trace back the lines of our democracy, I didn't know that our model for democracy was based on the Indian League of Nations. I didn't know that they'd been honored advisors to the Continental Congress. I didn't know they'd provided the inspiration for revolution, and that the colonists had dressed as Indians at the Boston Tea Party, not because it was the only costume left, but because the American Indians were an example of a race of people living in freedom according to natural law. I didn't know that Thomas Jefferson had changed a draft of the Declaration of Independence from proclaiming our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and property to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness based on the tribal beliefs of the people they lived among. And I certainly didn't know about the history of the depiction on the back of our dollar bill, which shows an eagle, the Native American symbol of wisdom and power, clutching a bundle of 13 wooden rods in its talon. I don't think I ever learned in school that George Washington followed the example of the tribal chiefs, rising in authority only during times of war, but relinquishing power once the fighting had ended. Or that every member of the Continental Congress understood the real revolution was not won by military might. It was won on the hope of an idea, the idea that men and women are inherently good, that we possess a conscience of morality, that our true nature is divinely inspired, and that we must be given the freedom to choose it for ourselves, protected from the enslavement of religion and oppression. In the Iroquois tradition, the creator god is called he who grasps the sky with both hands. And it is this God who says that we will not continue to live as a people if we forget peace. This is what draws me to the native teachings, the inspiration of reaching skyward and balancing, and the balance of grasping it with both hands, one of them being the hand of the feminine, which holds the space for peace. In order to maintain their connection, the natives attuned themselves to a higher sense of wisdom. Communicating with the gods was of prime importance, and it was left in the charge of the fire keepers. Like priests, these tribal leaders reverently tended the flames in order to keep alive a sense of the divine by means of a constant connection between earth and sky. Fire keepers maintained this link between above and below, and it was the job of the myth keepers to create a bond between before and after. This was how balance worked in their culture. It was the idea of two hands holding the extremes and the body, our body, between them, operating as the conduit. In this way, the myth keepers held the past in one hand and the future in the other, and they would pass along tribal legacy to young initiates in order to preserve their history and inform the generations to come. These two honorable leaders, fire keeper and myth keeper, worked in tandem to prepare a young family member to hear the tribe's sacred stories. A medicine man would scratch the youngster's skin with the teeth of a rattlesnake and then administer a red healing powder, which would allow these stories to penetrate more deeply into the soul. And then the young tribe member would join the myth keeper in an earthen-covered hut, and by the light of the fire, he would receive this ancient tribal wisdom. I'll just tell you, one of these stories was about the symbol on the back of the dollar bill. It represents a familial bond. A father gives each of his 13 sons a wooden rod and tells them that they could each break it with little effort. But if they tie the 13 rods together, you wouldn't be able to break the bundle. That's the symbol on the back of our dollar bill. Strength and unity together. I'm just going to leave you with this one last idea about democracy. Up until very recently, democracy has been misunderstood. We now know what Ben Franklin didn't, that democracy is not an experiment. It isn't a fantastic new idea that Greeks came up with in Athens. It isn't even the brainchild of Native Americans who weren't considered smart enough to develop something so humane. In fact, democracy wasn't invented by humans. It came from nature. Democracy is something that all of nature is based on, and something so connected to the essence of who we are that all empires and dictatorships and monarchies are destined to fall in order to be replaced by what is inherently within us. I hope you all can hear me. I got these blowers out here. So here's the idea. Darwin's theory of natural selection was updated 150 years after he came up with it. Charles Darwin was wrong. It isn't survival of the fittest and the strongest and the fastest and the meanest. The animal kingdom appears to be living in a dictatorship where the head honcho leads his pack with an iron fist. But the truth is, the pack has voting rights and veto power, over even the most barbarous and violent warlords. By close observation of what really happens in the animal world, from insects to primates, long term survival is dependent upon the most democratically minded group working together. New Agers call it collective consciousness, but two scientists at the University of Sussex in England call it collective decision making. Animals vote by pointing or standing or moving or otherwise indicating their intentions, and the majority rules in all but the most grave of decisions. In nature, the wisdom of the group always overrides the most intelligent individuals. In nature, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In nature, those who stick together, those who don't work toward harmony and unity, don't survive. So here we are sitting around our sacred fire, the power of our warrior spirit present within us and among us, a collection of power flowing through us, our tiny hollow bones of connectivity. We feel our ancient wisdom. We feel our responsibility to be an open channel between the past and the future, to fill ourselves with love, to fill ourselves with power, and to give it away. And I just want to end by opening it up. Everyone who's come here is so powerful that I just want you to share if you have anything that you've envisioned for today, for this week ahead. I invite you to share it with us now as we sit here around our fire.